Anna Maria Helt here, herbalist and microbiologist. Welcome to Monday's Mushroom episode 15. I always have to think about what episode it is. The topic this week is microbes in your mushrooms. And so to clarify, what I will be referring to as mushrooms are the fruiting bodies, the sex parts basically, the part that we see sticking out of the ground, the tree, or sitting in the produce department of the grocery store. The organism proper, the fungi, the fungus itself, lives within whatever the growth substrate is. It might be a pile of horse manure, it might be a dead log, it might be that growing kit, the block of sawdust sitting on your kitchen counter. The fungal organism exists in mycelial form inside that structure, these little filamentous forms, and then it sticks out what we think of as the mushroom when it's ready to reproduce. And that's the part that we eat. Anyway, if you are eating mushrooms, know that you are also eating the bacteria and the fungi and other stuff that lives inside of that mushroom. And before you freak out, you're fine, right? You've been eating these things for a while and you've been okay, as far as I know. So let's get into these things. So they're endophytes is what I'm referring to here. These little critters, these bacteria, these fungi, they're endophytes. Endo means within or inside of. Phytes means plants, and that's where these microbes were first identified about a century ago, living inside of plants. But they also live inside of fungi, mushrooms, as well as the mycelium that lives within the growth substrate. So maybe they should be called endomycs. Please give me credit for that term. So let's get into this a little bit more. So let's take one of the most popular edible wild mushrooms around the globe. That is the chanterelle, the Cantharellus genus. Chanterelles, one individual fruiting body like what we're looking at here, will have millions of endophytic bacteria living in it. And they don't destroy it while they're living in it, but they're there in these very long-lasting fruiting bodies. If you hunt these, you know that they don't really go bad. Once they fruit it, they might dry out, but that's about it. So I may be grossing you out by sharing that with you, but there you go. You're getting a little extra protein. Studies looking at morels, which are another really delicious edible mushroom. Just be sure you cook them or they're toxic. Little side note there. Studies in morels and certain other mushroom species have found that their endophytic population, their resident microbes, that population actually changes dynamically as the mushroom matures, as that fruiting body grows and matures. And so there's this dynamic shift in what we could essentially think of as their microbiome. And that, causation and correlation, those are things that often get confused. This does imply that perhaps there is a different role for different species of endophyte as the mushroom grows and develops. And that's what some of the data is starting to show. Also in morels, specifically in the black morel known as Morchella conica, it was found that the population of endophytes in the fruiting body, so in the mushroom bits that we're looking at here, differ from the endophytes present in the mycelium, so the fungal organism proper that is living in the ground or whatever the growth substrate happens to be. So there are differences there as well. And this is another aside, but those of us who work a lot with medicinal mushrooms know that there are differences between the mycelia and the fruiting body in terms of the chemistry there, in terms of the medicine. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, although traditional usage is based on the fruiting body. But it's just that they may be a little different, not necessarily the same. And I wonder how much of that difference could be due to different populations of microbes that are found in the fruiting body versus the mycelium. Anyway, a little nerdery there. Another fungus, which I neglected to get a picture of, where the resident microbes have a big effect on the fungus, is in truffles. And so it's been found, and we'll just keep looking at morels here for a minute, it's been found that the aroma and the flavor are very characteristic of truffles and very strong, whether you've had black truffles or whitish truffles, or you're like me and you're too cheap and you just get a tiny little bottle of truffle oil every once in a while. That characteristic aroma is largely, if not entirely, due to endophytic bacteria living in that truffle. And they're making a chemical or a class of chemicals called thiophene Volatiles, Thiophene, volatiles. And whenever you see THIO or thio, that means sulfur containing. So that kind of pungent, stinky, but delicious aroma of truffles are due to these volatile compounds made by their resident bacteria, which is kind of mind-blowing in my mind anyway. All right, moving on to mushrooms that I do have pictures of. King trumpet mushrooms, Pleurotus species here, have endophytic bacteria that are capable of making vitamin B12. And we do know that quite a few mushroom species actually have significant levels of vitamin B12, which is especially good for vegetarians and vegans to be aware of. Not only that, but trumpet mushrooms have endophytes that make growth stimulating hormones for the fungus. So going back to, or actually I should say that is foreshadowing one of the potential roles of endophytes that they play in mushrooms. Along those lines, oyster mushrooms and other Pleurotus species also have endophytes in them, endophytic bacteria that stimulate their growth. Same thing with the prized matsutake mushroom, tricoloma mushroom. This is a dried out one that I found last season. They also have bacteria that live within them that help them grow and probably help them do a lot of other things as well. Same thing with the boring old grocery store button mushroom, Agaricus bisporus. Also has growth stimulating bacteria that live within them. So pretty cool stuff here. And then I'll leave you with one last little fungal tidbit here as it pertains to their endophytes. There is a mushroom I should say there's a genus of mushrooms called Leccinum that people eat sometimes somewhat similarly to boletes. There might be a little toxicity in some of them, yet another side note. But anyway, Leccinum, this mushroom, so you'll see two of them on the left with Milo's butt, is known to be inhabited by turkey tails, a medicinal mushroom. On the right there, Trametes species. Trametes mushrooms live as endophytes inside of Leccinum mushrooms. That really blew my mind. And you might be like, whatever, lady. But if you're a big mushroom geek, you might think that's really cool. So a medicinal mushroom, one of the best known medicinal mushrooms on the planet, grows as an endophyte in other mushrooms. How cool is that? So why are these endophytes, or endomycs, sorry, I can't help but do that, why are they there? What are they doing for the mushroom? You know, in terms of the critters themselves, the bacteria and the fungi, you could see where maybe they're getting a home living inside of that mushroom. They may be getting some food, they may be getting some protection, a place to live in shitty weather, but what is the fungus getting out of it? What is the mushroom itself getting out of it? Well, this is not a new association. This has been going on based on the fossil record for a very long time, but we do know from the science that the endophytes found in mushrooms aren't just kind of there randomly, meaning if you look at different species of mushrooms, you see different populations of endophytes living in those mushrooms. So it's not like there's just the same species of bacteria showing up across the fungal kingdom. So this suggests that there may be some specific give and take going on with those microorganisms and the particular mushroom that they live within. So let me just center myself some more. It looks like I'm staring off into the wilderness. Sorry, if you've been watching my videos, you already know that I'm technologically lost. My goal here is to just provide good info. Anyway, so the buds get a home, some level of protection. The mushroom may be getting some assistance with its growth and its development from its resident endophytes. The mushroom may be getting some help with sporulation, so how it reproduces, the generation and release of mushroom spores or mushroom seeds, as you may think of them. The endophytes may be providing that fruiting body, that mushroom, with defense against predation. It's not stopping me from picking them, but defense against grazing and predation, or defense against infection. So this is kind of similar to what endophytes do in plants. Now, from a practical point of view, this may be useful for mushroom cultivation. So for instance, for those mushrooms that are already commonly cultivated, like button mushroom or shiitake mushroom, it's possible that endophytes from that particular species of mushroom can be used as sort of a bioinoculant, as they're calling it, to improve crop yields. And this becomes a bigger and bigger issue as food becomes a bigger and bigger issue with climate change and such happening. And also this this should reduce the use of nasty herbicides and pesticides, for instance, that are sometimes used for growing mushrooms. And so if you have a bioinoculant that is originated from that species of mushroom, or even from closely related species, that are able to help those mushrooms defend themselves against diseases and such, that reduces the use of nasty, noxious chemicals. Also, in terms of mushrooms that are really difficult to cultivate or have not yet been cultivated, these are those that usually grow specifically in association with certain trees. Scientists are looking into their endophytes, defining who lives in what type of mushroom, to see if that can be taken advantage of in order to be able to start growing some of these mushrooms, boletes or chanterelles. How cool would that be? To be able to grow them in a way that's commercially viable so that people can have access to them, and the cost maybe will come down a little bit. If you ever bought chanterelles in the grocery store, they cost a lot of money. And also this can reduce some pressure for mushrooms that are really popular and maybe being overpicked in some areas. So there actually is some practicality to this whole story, even though to me it's kind of a gee whiz sort of thing. I just think it's really cool that mushrooms have things living in them. You might be grossed out by it, but the reality is none of us is an individual, right? We have our own microbiome within us and on us. All plants tested to date have their own microbiomes, all these microbes that live in them and on them, and the same's true for mushrooms. So anyway, there you go, a little mushroom nerdery. Thank you for tuning in, and I will try not to take so long to get the next Monday's mushroom to you. Be well, y'all.